Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui in Beijing. South Korean TV and pop stars may be the first to suffer from cooling relations with China as their country goes ahead with the deployment of the THAAD missile shield program. Reports suggest clearly that pop culture is becoming a first casualty in the larger political game. Is this the first step in the backlash against what China considers a provocative policy? How is the trade likely to be further affected as deployment is carried out? And what can be done to reduce tensions between the two major economies in Northeast Asia as a whole? In the first half of the discussion, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Teng Jimeng of Beijing Foreign Studies University. We shall also cross over to Xin Ham, CCTV correspondent in Seoul. In the second half, when we come back, I'll be joined by Teng Jianqun, director of the Center of Arms Control at the China Institute of International Studies. But before we begin our discussion here, let's take a look at this.
South Korea angered China last month by agreeing to allow a United States missile defense system on its soil, and there has been widespread speculation that China's media watchdog will ban K-pop and K-dramas in reprisal. A fan meeting scheduled for this weekend in Beijing with the stars of a popular Korean drama series was abruptly cancelled just days ago. And an appearance by a Korean boy band on a Chinese TV music show was also cancelled at the last minute. In a strongly worded editorial, the People's Daily warned Seoul of the potentially costly domino effect of its decision. China has strongly opposed the THAAD deployment as a threat to the national security of China, which damages the strategic balance in the region. Defense Ministry spokesman Yang Yu-jun reiterated China's concerns in a recent press conference.
China will keep a close watch on the movements of the U.S. and the ROK, and will consider the adoption of necessary measures in order to safeguard national strategic security and regional strategic balance.
THAAD has also been the subject of domestic protests in South Korea, particularly by those living in the rural county of Seongju, where the first battery will be installed. Residents say the system's powerful radar poses health and environmental hazards and argue that its presence will make them a prime military target. A South Korean expert on bilateral relations has urged the government to be cautious about the THAAD deployment and to enhance mutual understanding with China.
Security cooperation between China and South Korea over the past 20 years has been very passive. That can easily lead to friction between the two. But now we can take this opportunity to start a security dialogue at a strategic level to develop their relations further. There are various security concerns for both sides, like the U.S.-South Korean partnership, DPRK nuclear issues, China-DPRK relations, China-South Korean relations, and so on. South Korea should let China know about their concerns, and China should do the same in terms of the THAAD deployment. Both sides should be honest with each other, and more importantly, improve their understanding.
Welcome to our studio discussion here, Dr. Teng. It's been reported by South China Morning Post and others that Chinese television producers have been told to expect fewer new approvals for shows featuring South Korean stars. There haven't been any formal written instructions from above as to the alleged ban. However, these Chinese guys say they have to change the plans. What do you think of the aftermath? That's said to be related to the deployment of a THAAD, a missile shield program in South Korea.
Well, the deployment of a THAAD actually caused a huge outrage here in China. I mean, not necessarily in the diplomatic circle, but also in the popular culture, in the media circle for certain. I think that very deployment, that very decision is outrageous, and that also aroused the very opposition from the industry, and especially pop culture and media industry in this very sense. According to the latest report, there is a huge protest among these young netizens, young people who used to be the addict of South Korean pop culture, now rose in rebelling against that very nation's culture production, and especially TV drama exported to this very country. And so even if it is not a written kind of instruction saying let's ban the culture products from South Korea, now it is almost like an involuntary sort of action taken by the industry to, in a sense, to restrict the cultural export to China.
Let me cross over to Xin Ham, our CCTV correspondent in Seoul, for his comments on the latest development. Hello, Shane. There's no doubt about the passion of patriotism for both sides, the Chinese and South Korean alike. Do you think there are strong lobby groups who would argue for relaxation of the current tensions between the two economies? Because it is, after all, the culture industry that will be the first casualty of a political game, and that's likely to cause anger from young people, particularly those in South Korea who have stayed apolitical and who show little interest in politics. What do you think of their suffering and their complaints?
Well, I think it's important to, first off, separate the political and the security issues here with the economy, because that is the exact concern here with South Koreans, is that this issue of THAAD is spilling over into other sectors of bilateral ties, including the economy, or with cultural ties or social ties and things like that. So obviously China is very important for South Korea from an economic standpoint. China is South Korea's largest trading partner. We have $300 billion of bilateral trade between the two countries last year alone, and of course culminating in the signing of a free trade agreement. So it doesn't take a genius to know that China is very important in terms of the economic standpoint, and also culturally and socially. Tourism from both sides. There's a big boom. More than half of the more than 13 million tourists that visit South Korea every year, in fact last year, came from China. So to see this political issue here with THAAD, which is, mind you, a very divisive issue here in South Korea. Recent polls show that 50% agree with it, but also 45% here in South Korea disagree with it, according to a recent Gallup poll. So this is a very divisive issue, and President Park Geun-hye is really being tested right now in terms of her diplomacy to really balance what is national security and, of course, the economy.
6 members of parliament from South Korea have come to Beijing for a negotiation with the government officials here, and they're going to have talk with scholars in Peking University at this moment to hopefully find a way out in what amounts to an effort of diplomacy. However, President Pyo King-hui says she would assume all responsibilities for the current standoff between the two economies. But my question is, Shen, how long do you think President Pyo would sustain her defiance, since there's a nosedive in the stock market for the cultural staffs?
Well, at this point, President Park Geun-hye has no intention to pull back on her decision of this THAAD decision to deploy it here in South Korea. This was a decision made from an alliance standpoint with the United States. Of course, the United States and South Korea, as well as Japan, are very, they have a strong alliance. That's what they want to show when it comes to dealing with the DPRK. And President Park Geun-hye has said, even earlier this week in a cabinet meeting, as early as this week, she has mentioned that nothing takes precedence over national security. And what she mentioned in that cabinet meeting was that she would like to see China take more of a proactive role in reeling back the threat from the DPRK, which is, mind you, according to her, more of a threat to this region in terms of security with the recent missile tests. We had a nuclear test. We have this continuing rhetoric coming from north of the DMZ here. So in terms of President Park's intentions at this point, there is no scaling back in this THAAD development right now.
Sure, there are no signs indicating her blink in the current standoff between China and South Korea. But back to the Beijing studio here, Jimeng, why there's been this cultural mania, quite in favor of the South Korean television dramas and pop culture? I mean, is it likely for the Chinese government, and particularly for Chinese fans, to use this as a wake-up call, if not a game changer, so that we could enhance our own competitive edge in the culture industry?
Well, the South Korean so-called K-pop or the K-drama has been very, very popular in China ever since the late 1990s. I think there are several advantages that we can attribute to that. First thing first, the South Korean TV dramas, especially family dramas and city romance kind of genre dramas, are very appealing because of the fact that they are suitable for family viewing. They appeal to both men and women, children, and secondly, the plot basically are very, very loose. The structural is very loose, so that they can extend each of these series into several ones. And so it is lengthy, it is interesting, and the plot was very, very, in a sense, kind of like deep, and sometimes we see even the same history shared by our two countries, like in Da Changjin, and also, I mean, some of these K-pop idols have been very, very popular since they lead the fashion, they lead in fashion, they lead in cosmetics, and especially plastic surgery, which also very much appealing to young people in this very nation. And so,
with regard to plastic surgery, I'm afraid we're going to have more grievances from Chinese girls who are likely to go to South Korea for looking better. I mean, in the hope of finding a good job after the plastic surgery. But what would be the aftermath? I mean, the cultural fallout for the Chinese fans? After all, some of the fans meetings with their South Korean superstars will be cancelled as a result of the severity of the cultural winter. Now, do you think the Chinese fans are likely to result in having to watch what they call the ridiculous anti-Japanese wartime television dramas? So they have been left disillusioned with some of the ridiculous stuffs about the war between China and Japan.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of ridiculous anti-Japanese TV dramas have been a disappointment to the viewers in this very country. And so that's why they look to our South Korean counterparts, which also provide lots of expertise and the niche in terms of helping China in terms of developing more kind of viewer-friendly materials and TV dramas that delves into history, urban life, and modernization, changes and transformations. But I think that viewers and young viewers in this very country can, in a sense, put our national interest above all that sort of thing. I mean, they should prioritize, and I hope that they prioritize our national interest. And which is why, among this a survey conducted among these young viewers, they would say, well, in front of national interest, there are no idols.
There are no idols in front of national interest.
No.
That starts to be a very popular slogan shared by the younger generation. Now, what can be done to improve our culture industry, particularly the television drama, instead of opting for the South Korean stuffs?
Well, China actually has a lot to learn. I think the learning curve is very steep in terms, for example, in terms of the creative side of it, the innovative side of TV dramas. China used to have a glorious past in terms of TV drama creation back in the 1990s. But then, since China's actually, this huge transformation, I think China is losing that very edge in terms of delving more deeply into our culture, our history. The South Koreans provide us a chance, an opportunity to learn and delve more deeply into our own history. Look at Da Changjin. It was all about their great history in terms of this women and women being promoted to that very royal doctor status. And so there's a lot of images, messages and imageries being, in a sense, very useful and interesting. Script writers, producers, and also in terms of the marketing. And so China is learning quickly. We should learn in terms of upgrading our production value and promoting and our professionalism, and also promoting, in a sense, in terms of marketing. And China actually has been very bad in terms of marketing. And look at the South Koreans. Look at these young, beautiful actors and actresses being promoted in China now, like Song Joong-ki. I mean, actually, who is basically the idol. I mean, idols tell us something about us, tell us what does this society is thinking about, tell us about this national identity. I mean, we cannot afford to identify with a South Korean idol. And I think that China is now high time trying to develop our own idols.
South Koreans at this moment must be holding their breath, watching out as to what's going to happen next. So let's cross over to Shin. What can we learn from South Koreans, despite the alleged severity of the cultural winter, from South Koreans about marketing the superstars? Our guest speaker here in the Beijing studio spoke of Song Joong-ki, whose payment for television drama series could be as high as 100 million RMB. That's a lot. That's a huge, that's an astronomical figure. What can you tell us about what we can learn from your country?
Well, if I can add to what the professor there just mentioned, South Korea obviously went through a steep learning curve as well in terms of how to reach the market here domestically. And now the Koreans are now learning to export this type of, because there is demand overseas, especially in China. And what South Koreans have, what I think have done really well is they've created these outrageous themes. Of course, deep down, they start from basic human feelings about love and hate and jealousy and these type of themes, but then you merge that into a very creative atmosphere. President Park Geun-hye here, her creative economy policies are a big platform for her to merge this with, of course, the technology to get this out there, because the audience now is very connected worldwide. Fans of K-pop, for example, are getting their information from the internet, from other social networking sites and places like this. So Korea is obviously a very wired nation, one of the fastest internet connectivity speeds in the world. So it really was a meshing and a mending of all these to create the perfect storm, really. And now we're seeing that. And I'll tell you this, not everyone in South Korea looks like Song Joong-ki, but they've marketed that image very well in other Asian markets.
Thank you very much for you guys' participation in the first half of the program. We're discussing what's going to happen after the deployment of a THAAD, a missile shield program, to the culture industry, particularly the pop culture coming out of South Korea to the Chinese market. We'll be back in a short while. Please stay with us. Welcome back. I'm joined here by Mr. Teng Jianqun, Director of the Center of Arms Control at the China Institute of International Studies. Also, we are going to have a crossover with Mr. Shen Ham, our CCTV correspondent, who's standing by in Seoul, capital city of South Korea, for a discussion about the fallout arising from the deployment of a THAAD, a missile shield program in the DIALOG. Welcome to our discussion here, Mr. Teng. Let's go to the heart of the issue. It's alleged that this tightening of the new approvals is related to South Korea's decision to go ahead with the deployment of a THAAD. US-backed THAAD anti-missile shield program, which China objects to. Is this the first step of an economic counteroffensive to what is considered a political provocation?
Yeah, this is really a challenge for the security of China and other countries in this region. We hurt the peace and stability, especially the stability among the major powers for the nuclear deterrence and nuclear operational capability in China and in Russia. So I think when we talk about the issue here, we should put the security on the top agenda, because every country always takes the security as the number one job, even at the sacrifice of economy or trade. So this time I think the response from the Chinese side actually is the very rational step taken by the central government, and I'm sure China will continue to have a close look at the deployment of such a system in ROK.
We see both sides pressing their own case. Taking South Korea as an example, they said, contrarily, that China should have done more to blame their brothers and sisters in the DPRK, the alleged closest ally of China, despite our weakened influence on the divided Korean Peninsula, particularly the DPRK. Now, the South Koreans argue strongly that instead of criticizing Seoul for the deployment of THAAD, we should impose harsher sanctions against the DPRK for its launch of missiles as well as a nuclear test. Now, what's wrong with our decision? I mean, this is their discourse. This is their perspective.
Yeah, I think this is actually execution given by the ROK and by the United States. The DPRK launched rounds of nuclear testing and also the missiles in recent years. So they should have such a system to protect the territory of ROK from the missile attack. But this is only an execution. I think if you look at the evolution of the attitude of ROKs toward the deployment of missile system, especially since the ending of Cold War, actually the previous governments were very cautious. But this time, this is not a decision made only by the ROK government, but it's a decision made by the United States. The U.S. Congress adopted a resolution, I think, 2 years ago that all the departments in the administration should persuade Japan and the ROK to deploy such a system. And I heard a story when I was in Seoul, I think 2 months ago, that the U.S. Forces even threatened the Park Geun-hye to deploy the THAAD system in the military bases without any consultation with the ROK government. So this is actually a decision made by the United States.
Shane, do you think both sides, China and the ROK, have fallen victim to the alleged proxy war in the age of a cold peace instead of having a cold war? I mean, this is a very controversial and debatable point at this moment. But why do you think President Park Geun-hye has seemingly come under or yielded to the mounting pressure from Washington over the deployment of THAAD at this moment?
Well, again, her reasoning, according to her statements, is that the threat from the DPRK is a growing threat. In fact, if you look at the history of the DPRK leader, Kim Jong-un, under his leadership, the country, and the number of missile tests that he has conducted in his 4.5 years or so in his reign, he's conducted nearly 36 missile tests, and in addition, he's of course conducted 2 nuclear tests. That's almost double the amount of missiles that his predecessor, his father, Kim Jong-il, had conducted in his nearly 2 decades in power. So the reasoning here is that the threat is growing. Also, the stance and the policy that President Park Geun-hye has shown against the DPRK is a very hardline stance. She's a conservative, and she's in the lines of not extending that olive branch out to the DPRK and rewarding what she mentions is the DPRK's escalating of tensions. So and also you can see that with the closing of the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Right now there's almost no reconciliation or exchanges between the 2 Koreas at this point. So for her to step away from that would be going against her hardline policies.
Shane, I wouldn't call this a blame game for both sides over the issue of a core national interest. However, many of the Chinese observers point out your government is not very nice and friendly by taking advantage of our territorial disputes in the South China Sea. They view this as a weak moment for the Chinese decision makers, and therefore they went ahead with the decision to deploy THAAD to take advantage of China's diplomatic impasse. What do you think of the Chinese concern?
Well, from the South Korean government's perspective, the South China Sea issue South Korea is also involved in territorial disputes in this region, of course, with Japan. But to make claims, I can't support the South Korean government for or against. I don't know what their intentions are. I'm not privy to their meetings in these decisions. But that's something that analysts might speculate.
In Chinese, we have a popular phrase. It's called 落井下石，很不厚道. At this defining moment of China's diplomatic impasse, what do you think of our serious concern about your very alleged bad behavior at this moment? It's not friendly. It's not in favor of China's strategic interest.
Well, but then if you look from the South Korean government's perspective, you have this threat of missiles being launched, which is very provocative in terms of the South Korean government's perspective. Mind you, I'm not taking the South Korean government's position here. I'm just relaying what their position has been according to their statements. But then you could say from the Chinese government's perspective, of course, this THAAD deployment is very provocative as well. But the imminent threat for South Korea is the DPRK. We're still at a state of war here on the Korean Peninsula.
Thank you very much,
in terms of diplomacy, President Park Geun-hye needs to tread carefully with Beijing at this point.
Thank you very much for your analysis. That's Shin Ham, our CCTV correspondent from Seoul. Welcome back. The deployment of THAAD, the missile shield program, is likely to tip the balance in favor of South Korea and perhaps the Southern Iron Triangle that aligns South Korea with Japan and the United States as opposed to the special strategic partnership between Moscow and Beijing, which is also described by some observers as weak given President Putin's current efforts to look east to balance the stakes between Europe and Asia after Crimea. So what do you think of the Chinese concerns to allegedly punish South Korea for the deployment?
I don't think this is a punishment against ROK at this moment, or against the DPRK. This is actually a game played by some countries in this region. I think, in my opinion,
So you admitted that this is actually a proxy war?
Yeah, in my opinion, I think the United States actually play a very dangerous game in this region. This is not only for the sake of ROK, but for the sake of the United States. For example, for the first time, as you mentioned just now, the three countries in this region, Japan, ROK, and the United States, joined together to do the missile defense joint drills in this region. This is actually, for the first time, ROK has been very cautious in this regard, and the previous government always denied the possibility to cooperate with Japan. But this time, after the deployment of THAAD, ROK has to cooperate with Japan and with the United States simultaneously. This is actually, I think, the most dangerous side for the deployment. Not only the system itself. In other terms, you mentioned, I think China and ROK, of course, will give very active response to this deployment. And I'm sure we all know China has been very active in recent years in security and in maintaining peace and stability just in our neighboring countries in the regions. So this is actually our attitude. And as for ROK, I think this is another dangerous game played by President Park Geun-hye, because I told our counterpart in Seoul, I think 2 months ago, sometime a small country, when you play game between two major powers, that the small country should be very cautious. No, otherwise you will be sandwiched by the two major powers.
Look at the issue of victimhood shared by most of the South Koreans on history. They say they accuse China of using the past and the alleged notorious tributary system to punish South Korea, which is weaker militarily and politically. And they say this is a reflection of chauvinism. What do you think of their concern?
If you look at history in recent 100 years, actually there were at least 4 large-scale wars between China and Japan, between China and the United States, and between Russia and Japan. So there were at least 4 large-scale wars, and China and Koreans actually suffered a lot from these wars. The sufferers, they're not beneficial from these wars. So any instability or even war that will give direct hurt to China and to ROK.
Long term, do you think President Park Geun-hye should act wisely and make some concessions so that the relationship will not be traumatized? Long term, it won't produce a very negative impact upon the national interest on both sides.
Yeah, I think that might be the best choice for her to, give some compromise in this regard. But I don't think, President Park at this moment will give any compromise, because this is not only an international issue. This is actually domestic politics, in Seoul. And after the parliament election, I think a month ago, she lost the majority in the parliament.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, there's a haunting specter of paying a heavy domestic political price for the decision of deploying THAAD. I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye.